warm welcome to the Caribbean Development Bank's inaugural Expert Forum on Anti-Corruption in the Age of Artificial Intelligence, hosted by the Office of Integrity, Compliance and Accountability. We are here today joining the world in observing International Anti-Corruption Day. Observing International Anti-Corruption Day under the theme Uniting with Our Youth Against Corruption, Shaping Tomorrow's Integrity. Corruption impacts everyone. No single institution, nation, or generation can combat it alone. It is a fight by all and for all. We stand together, united in the conviction that the fight against corruption is not a fight for the few and will not end soon. We know what's at stake. Corruption disproportionately impacts the poor, the weak, and the most vulnerable. It exacerbates inequality and, like a fire, burns through individual, national, and global progress. For instance, the cost of bribery is about $1.2 to $1.5 trillion, or 2% of GDP. That's money for hospitals and schools and roads and livelihoods. We must not fight in fear, but with courage and optimism that we have new tools like AI that we can use to dismantle old and pervasive problems like corruption. This fight must be inclusive and technology-driven. We must confront corruption with every mind engaged and every hand on the wheel, in particular the minds and hands of our youth. Today, we place our youth at the heart of this mission. They are not just the leaders of tomorrow, they are the innovators of today who can use technology for good. See, corruption robs them of opportunities, but it can also drive their determination to fight it, their willingness to engage with innovative technologies like AI, their vision, their creativity, and energy to drive the change we all need to help counter corruption effectively. In this age of artificial intelligence, which really began formally as a concept in 1956, 13 years before CDB was established, it emerged as an academic discipline. That was a long time ago, but today its pace of evolution is so amazing that as an organization, there's much that we need to learn and quickly do. AI, you see, is a game changer, revolutionizing or revitalizing how we live, work, and deliver good governance for our people, institutions, and countries. For anti-corruption, it's like our tireless watchdog that never sleeps. AI, in particular generative AI, has a game-changing, exponential, transformative purpose as a general purpose technology, with both potentials and perils to expose corruption and ensure that it is wisely used for good. And we have to wield that. CDB has a major role to play in how we use AI to combat corruption and involve our youth in the Caribbean. And we're already helping to make this happen. We are mandated and motivated to act. Our charter requires that every dollar of development funding entrusted to us must reach its intended beneficiaries. Corruption can undermine that vision and divert clean funds from projects into the hands of corrupt criminals and undermine the development of our financial ecosystem. But every dollar that is diverted and lost and stolen is not just financial loss. It undermines the progress and the promise of good governance. So we have to leverage every tool in the toolkit. The exponential and potential transformative power of AI will help us to redefine our institutional architecture to confront corruption and remain on our mission to combat poverty. This is not easy. When it comes to corruption and youth at CDB, we've moved beyond the talk and consistently acted. We've delivered on our promise to protect our institution from the perils of corruption and to be a voice that delivers and amplifies thought leadership on anti-corruption. For us, combating corruption is critical to CDB's role and effectiveness as a development agency and an international financial institution. We've established an internal strategic framework and created an Office of Integrity, Compliance and Accountability, through which our work on anti-corruption and this forum are facilitated. We've hosted free virtual conferences on corruption, which we call 3Cs. We've posted free content online, tons of it. We've hosted fora and partnered with global thought leaders, academics, and stakeholders. This expert forum on anti-corruption AI is another step in our ongoing commitment to promote integrity and good governance across the Caribbean. We must have the generosity to share and the humility to learn from others. We must have the courage to ask critical questions like, how can we learn from our experts about the practical uses of AI and harness that innovative technology for our youth as well to combat corruption? We know that approximately 60% of the region's population is under 30 years old. Our young people must be at the forefront of this fight, asking questions, raising awareness, proposing solutions, learning and leading with integrity. using their knowledge and skills, which they also must continue to learn. We've also engaged our young people in multiple fora. We've listened to them and we've acted. On November 19th, as a precursor to this forum, we hosted the inaugural Youth Forum on combating corruption in the age of AI. It empowered our young people to share their insights on how AI can be both a tool and a challenge in the fight against corruption. Their insights reminded us that the future isn't just theirs to inherit, it's theirs to shape. The success of the Youth Forum reflects our belief that youth engagement is essential to achieving our fiduciary duty and for good governance across the Caribbean. Their strong, intelligent contributions are captured in a youth statement which will be delivered after the expert session. But let's focus on the expert session for a moment. Today's expert forum explores the promise, perils, and opportunities of AI and corruption. We do so with insight from extraordinary minds. We're honored to have Professor Niels Kobish join us. We're honored to have Eugene Wu from the FBI join us. They will be joined by experts from the Integrity Vice Presidency of the World Bank, led by Marcelo Donalo, Manager Prevention, Knowledge Management, and Krishna Kasari, Data Scientist and Data Team Lead. They will share practical insights, examples, and strategies to leverage AI to build systems within institutions to fight corruption. Let us approach today's expert forum with broad and open minds. Corruption and AI are significantly impacting our world and in vastly different and mirrored ways. While corruption undermines trust, AI holds the promise to rebuild it and shape a future built on trust and integrity. And it is a worthy pursuit. We're not alone in this pursuit. In fact, we simply cannot do it alone. We cannot, however, be competitors in combating corruption. And that is why we're here today. We need courage and wisdom, because it takes courage to mount any mission to confront corruption, and it takes wisdom to embrace technology like AI to constructively and effectively defeat it. Today, our experts will show us the way, and our youths will have their say. Today is more than a moment to learn and a meeting of minds and a forum for exchanges. It is also a call to action. Let us seize it. Let us unite against corruption, harness the power and potential of AI for good, encourage our youth to build a future built on integrity and innovation for our generation and future generations. Welcome and thank you again for joining. We will start this forum with remarks from Mr. Eugene Wu, Chief of International Corruption Unit of the FBI.
Corruption is a worldwide issue, and it's often associated with bribery and other illicit financial activities. Corruption can lead to a reduction in critical infrastructure and services, decreased public confidence in governing institutions, and a reduced interest in foreign investment. All these factors have severe negative impacts on criminal and national security interests globally, given the potential to amplify humanitarian crises, contribute to human rights abuse, lead to political instability, and create economic volatility. Illicit financial activities, such as money laundering, undermine the integrity and stability of the financial sector, affecting regulatory effectiveness, cross-border financial flows, and corresponding bank relationships. Cybercrime can cause digital, economic, psychological, and societal harm, which can result in loss of consumer trust and theft of financial assets and intellectual property. The FBI's International Corruption Unit, our mission is to lead domestic and international law enforcement efforts in the fight against foreign corruption. Due to the international aspect of our international corruption program, the FBI at large, we have devoted significant time and resources to build relationships with foreign law enforcement partners and agencies in various countries all over the world. The FBI's legal attaché offices cover over 180 countries and from U.S. embassies all around the world. The FBI's International Corruption Program has dedicated personnel that specialize in addressing violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, known as the FCPA, kleptocracy, antitrust, international fraud against the government, international corruption of federal public officials, and the newly enacted Foreign Extortion Prevention Act, referred to as FEPA. Complementary to FCPA, FEPA, which was signed into law in December of 2023 and was most recently amended in July, provides the FBI with a new statute that allows us to identify and prosecute foreign officials who are requesting bribe payments from U.S. companies. FIPA criminalizes the demand side of a foreign bribery transaction by prohibiting the solicitation of a bribe payment by a foreign official. FIPA provides a maximum sentence of 15 years imprisonment and a maximum fine of either $250,000 US or 3 times the value of the solicited bribe. The FBI and the Department of Justice continue to conduct outreach during industry conferences, such as today, to raise awareness of this new and powerful prosecutorial tool. The FBI is working to raise global awareness for American companies doing business abroad, especially in jurisdictions where bribes are historically solicited. In the past, it was rare for these foreign officials to be criminally charged or sanctioned in their home country. There are examples of officials who not only remained in their positions, but went even further and retaliated against those that cooperated against them. FIPA provides the FBI with the means to pursue these actors and hold them accountable for these dangerous and harmful criminal activities. Another new development that will enhance the FBI's ability to investigate international corruption was the DOJ's announcement of a pilot program for corporate whistleblower awards. Whistleblowers who provide the DOJ information about corporate criminal violations, to include potential FCPA violations, may be eligible for substantial financial awards. These whistleblowers should greatly enhance the FBI's ability to identify and investigate FCPA investigations. The FBI's International Corruption Unit regularly participates in conferences and trainings like this one to educate our partners about the various violations, responsibilities, and ways that we can work together. In collaboration with the U.S. State Department's Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs, the FBI established the Transnational Anti-Corruption Partnership Program, known as the TAP program. The TAP program supports the FBI's mission to lead global anti-corruption efforts through investigations into violations of FCPA, kleptocracy, and antitrust matters. The TAP program is comprised of 6 FBI agents who serve as advisors based in strategic international locations, including Bogota, Colombia, Budapest, Hungary, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, Mexico City, Mexico, Dakar, Senegal, and Pretoria, South Africa. They engage in capacity building and liaise with governments and law enforcement agencies in their area of responsibility relative to anti-corruption efforts. The TAP program's mission focuses on 3 pillars. First is cultivating collaborative relationships with and among foreign law enforcement partners. Second, strengthening the ability of foreign partners to effectively investigate and prosecute corruption. And third, building capacity to pursue and repatriate the illicit proceeds of corruption-related crimes. The TAP advisors, they build these relationships through sharing case experiences, mentoring, and providing guidance and training on how to investigate and prosecute targets of international corruption probes in partner countries. As part of their many initiatives, the TAP program hosts several regional anti-corruption working groups with the goal of establishing new relationships across borders and facilitate the collaboration among foreign law enforcement agencies of various countries. Most recently, we held working group meetings this past May in Mauritius with partners from 7 African countries, and in September in Lima, Peru, with our partners from 6 Latin American countries. These working groups aid in bringing together working-level anti-corruption investigators, prosecutors, and analysts from several countries within the same region. To foster collaboration, each delegation presents a corruption investigation that is currently requiring assistance from the regional partners and discuss any issues they face during their investigation. Through continued meetings, the working groups serve as a forum to discuss current trends, share information, learn new approaches, and collectively act on anti-corruption strategies. In addition to the TAP program, the FBI works with international partners as a member of the International Anti-Corruption Coordination Center, the IACCC, that's based in London. The IACCC is a multi-agency team of investigators and intelligence analysts from around the world with expertise in bribery and corruption investigations. Comprised of member agencies from Australia, Canada, France, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Singapore, the UK, and the US, and an additional 9 countries as associate members, to include agencies within the Caribbean, the IACCC has access to diverse law enforcement intelligence resources and possess the ability to gather intelligence across multiple jurisdictions, providing support to agencies around the globe that investigate grand corruption offenses. The IACCC receives a request and then takes an overview of the intelligence collected from its multiple partners and provides a composite intelligence package back to the requesting entity. By working together, the IACCC has identified more than 1.8 billion US dollars in assets which were not known to the requesting country at the time of their request, and more than 6 billion US dollars in assets have been restrained through IACCC assistance. In an effort to implement consistent and active support for the capacity building and mentorship efforts of the IACCC, the TAP advisors, they travel with members of the IACCC to deliver intelligence packages and provide accompanying training and guidance to the requesting entity. Delivery of these intelligence packages includes in-depth discussions of the intelligence, advice on possible investigative strategies, and any training needed to implement those strategies. These visits provide an opportunity for the type of case-based mentorship that is at the core of the TAP advisor's mission. As part of the FBI, we work these matters for many reasons, including national security implications, which can be directly attributed to the wealth and power involved. We have the capabilities and the tools to investigate corruption, which can have negative effects on the US stock markets, real estate values, and overall economy. We have also seen the devastation that foreign corruption can cause across the globe and the issues it causes to the populations of the affected countries. International corruption undermines democratic values, public accountability, and weakens the rule of law. We are starting to see many countries electing new administrations that campaigned on anti-corruption platforms and are now reaching out to the FBI and the IACCC for assistance in identifying stolen assets and collecting evidence from foreign jurisdictions to hold their former officials accountable for their corrupt acts. In addition, there is an increase in collaboration with the Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, information received from civil society, and investigative journalists who are providing information about corruption and high levels of government around the world. Today's conference, held on December 9th, is International Anti-Corruption Day. It's a day not only for reflection, but also for accountability across the global community. Action has been taken in this country and around the world to improve intelligence collection and analysis and increase resources aimed to curb illicit finance, hold corrupt actors accountable through sanctions or criminal prosecutions, forge multilateral partnerships, and equip frontline leaders to take on transnational corruption. The challenges in fighting against corruption is best worked in collaboration, leveraging resources from allies and partners in different sectors, and working in tandem to ensure criminal and corrupt actors are held accountable. With that said, that brings me to the conclusion of my opening. I hope you all enjoy the presentations and discussions for the remainder of this conference. Thank you very much.
We will now move to more focused key insights on artificial intelligence and corruption from the experts. So the next 2 presentations are for everyone. They're for the curious, for the young, for the academics, for our policymakers, and our full spectrum of political, economic, social, and decision makers and leaders of today and tomorrow. I must say that responsibly designed AI can help us to detect, prevent, and investigate corruption in any area, whether procurement or production. And this is more possible today for 3 reasons. Firstly, there's a reduction in the marginal cost of data collection and storage. There's a decline in the cost of compute power, and more so because research is being done and knowledge is being shared about the potential and pitfalls of AI. These concepts are being demystified and shared by people like the fast-rising star I'm about to introduce, the expert himself, Professor Niels Kubis. Professor Kubis is the professor and chair of the Human Understanding of Algorithms and Machines Research Center at the University of Duisburg-Essen, and an affiliated researcher with the Max Planck Institute for Human Development. His work is very interesting and very relevant. It deals with corruption, unethical behavior, social norms, and artificial intelligence. He's the co-founder of a global anti-corruption podcast, completed his PhD as well in social psychology before studying both AI and anti-corruption and corruption in Amsterdam. He is what I call an emerging interdisciplinary unicorn among global academic stars. He's a very clear and insightful thinker, extensive researcher and thought leader on corruption and AI. We're honored to have Professor Kubish join us today to deliver our keynote to our spotlight session on navigating risks and potentials of AI and corruption.
The talk I'm giving today is about a topic that is very close to my heart, and it's on the topic of basically the interplay between AI and corruption. And this is a topic that has basically triggered my interest a few years ago when I was doing a postdoc at the University of Amsterdam on the collaborative roots of corruption. So for all of those who might be intrigued by this title, I can tell you a little bit about what I've been working on at that particular moment. It was basically trying to understand from a behavioral perspective when and how people engage in corruption. And so that was basically my first postdoc that came out of my PhD. So during my PhD, I was mostly focusing on the social psychology of corruption. And then during my postdoc, I was doing behavioral economics experiments. So both of these fields have in common that they conduct experiments to understand how other people are shaping our ethical behavior. And one question that got me interested is basically, well, if other people can influence us, how can AI actually influence us? Increasingly, AI systems are able to imitate humans, sometimes even surpass them in certain tasks. And so the question that got me interested was basically really what are the risks, but also the potential for AI in the context of corruption. And so I joined the Max Planck Institute, the Center for Humans and Machines, where I worked with Iyad Ravan on these questions. And I'm going to show you some of the research that we conducted there. And then in the meantime, I was lucky that I got a position as a professor here in Duisburg, which I am aware that many people who are here today might not be fully aware where this place is. I mean, Duisburg is actually one of the cities in the Ruhr Valley. So the Ruhr Valley is interestingly one of the largest but also greenest metropolitan areas in Germany. It's very densely populated in the west of Germany. And what is unique and why I bring this up on one slide is to basically show you what we've been doing here at this research center. And that is, instead of building an AI center in each of the universities in the Ruhr Valley, we actually decided that it would be better to gear up, so to actually collaborate on this very important topic of AI. So we have the Technical University in Dortmund, the University in Duisburg, and the University in Bochum all joining forces to form one research center that does interdisciplinary research on AI. And we are very keen and open to collaborate with policymakers and practitioners, but also host researchers. And so if you're interested, we have an internship program. And if you're interested in our research, I would encourage you to check it out and apply. We would be very happy to have you join us. And if you're wondering what we're working on, today I'm going to give you a bit of a snapshot about some of the things that we do. In part, it stems from my work at the Max Planck Institute, but in part, it's also newer stuff that I've been doing in the last few months. And the talk that I'm going to give to you is basically structured in two parts. And it's similar to the title. It basically looks at the risks, but also the potential. And it mostly draws on these two papers/reports that I wrote together with my colleagues. So the first one is a report we wrote for Transparency International, and it's called The Corruption Risks of Artificial Intelligence. That's what I'm going to talk about first. And then the other one is a paper that we published in Nature Machine Intelligence that is looking at more of the promises, also the perils, but mostly the promises of using AI to fight corruption. So first, I want to set the stage to highlight what are actually important features of AI to understand what its corruption risks are. And I want to start us off in a very, let's say, dry way by giving you a definition of AI. I know it's maybe not the most enticing way to talk about the topic, but I think it's important to set the stage. So the EU is actually defining AI as systems that display intelligent behavior by analyzing their environment and taking actions with some degree of autonomy to achieve specific goals. Now, what's unique about AI in that sense is that it's different from classic technologies, such as rule-based systems. So rule-based systems are highlighted here with this if Y then X, logic is basically really like any type of technology pre-AI that was quite predictable in what it would do. And the difference to AI is really that through technologies or techniques such as machine learning, we are increasingly moving into less predictable territory. So the outputs of several AI models are often actually hard to predict and even unknown to those who are developing these systems. And for those of you who are interested in seeing this in action, I can highly recommend the documentary on AlphaGo, which is a board game that the DeepMind team in London has been trying to beat with an algorithm. I won't spoil any further. The documentary is openly available on YouTube, and you can actually see a bit what it means that sometimes even those who are developing algorithms do not exactly do as the developers would predict. Now, all you need to know basically here is that we are moving away from predictable machines to less predictable machines. And that's just one of the features that I believe makes AI unique in the context of corruption. So the first point is what I just mentioned, autonomy. The second point is what I already alluded to, what some people call opacity or black box models. And what all that means is basically that oftentimes the workings of AI systems are really hard to understand. They've become so complex that even highly trained engineers and AI experts have a tough time to fully understand what is going on. Now, thanks to these things, we've basically developed models and systems that in some domains have reached AI human levels, and other domains have actually surpassed human level performance. And that obviously is, sort of a new potential, but also a new risk. At the same time, many of these features are quite scalable at low cost. Toussaint has already referred to it. Computation has become much cheaper and has therefore enabled basically an upscaling of many of these AI systems. And the one thing that is sort of almost a contradiction to that is that at the same time, while you can reach more people, you can target them individually. And that used to be a contradiction in the sense that when you wanted to target a person specifically, you would need one-to-one interaction. Take the example of therapy, right? Like you would say that for a successful therapy, you need to have a one-to-one matching where the therapist can actually customize, personalize the feedback based on the patient. Now, some people argue that with AI, we can actually do that at scale. So we can actually customize feedback based on previous information and memory for a given person, and that is almost freely scalable to many people. And those are all features that obviously also play a role when we think about corruption. And here, what I basically want to show you is like a typical process of how AI systems are actually being developed. We have data scientists working on the development. We have an owner of a system. And then we have an auditor who is basically checking the system. And that will, in the end, then through a feedback loop, lead to a refinement of such a model. Now, this refinement has several steps that are maybe not so important at this point. But at one point, the owner, together with the data scientist, sort of decides to deploy a model, right? So at one point, OpenAI decided now it's time to send ChatGPT out in the world. And then we have users who can use the system. Now, at many of these steps, we see several risks that these systems might be abused for private gains by power holders. So let me walk you through some of the corruption risks that we identified in this report that I referred to earlier. So the first one is basically what we could call a corrupt design, right? So you could think about, for example, politicians who are commissioning people who are really well versed in, for example, computer vision to generate deepfakes, to discredit opponents, to cement their power. So we would have, for example, someone in a power position in the classical sense of, for example, being a high-ranking politician who is making use of AI for private gains. And that, examples of those are abound. For those of you who have followed the Russian invasion in Ukraine, you might have come across some of these examples of deepfakes trying to actually influence, political decision making and views about certain politicians. There's also the risk of corrupt manipulation. So the owner of the system could manipulate a system. If you think about there's a really great example from the medical context where a power holder, in this case actually a doctor, found out the following. So we have what you can see on the right side here, increasingly AI systems being used for diagnoses, especially, for example, when it comes to skin cancer, right? And oftentimes the way the system works is that it is trained on images. Some of them are showing benign forms of moles, for example, and some images show malignant forms of moles that can be a risk of cancer. And the system is trained on these images over time so that it can discern one from the other. And if you basically use the system responsibly, it can actually outperform doctors in this particular task. Now, there have been cases documented where doctors found out that by making slight perturbations to the image, which are invisible to the human eye, I mean, for you, I guess the left image and the right image look exactly the same. For me, they do too. For the AI, they look completely different. So this image here was classified as benign, and this image here was classified as malignant. Now, why is that important? Well, there are cases that have been documented where doctors have abused this knowledge and have used these little perturbations to basically turn a benign diagnosis into a malignant. Why? Because they could then actually hide behind the algorithm and say, look, the algorithm says it's malignant, we got to make an operation that is usually quite costly. And so you see there's a risk of those who know how the system works to hide behind the algorithm, because they can say, look, the algorithm actually suggested that it's malignant. I am only executing what the algorithm told me. And this can lead to new forms of corruption that are incredibly difficult to detect. Right? If you were interested in that, I highly recommend reading this paper in Science that outlined a few of these risks. There are, however, also other cases that you could think of that some people have called algorithm capture, meaning like you actually capture the algorithm even before deployment to be biased in a certain direction. Now imagine you have hiring officials who are changing quotas in exchange for bribes, right? So you could actually tinker with the model before it is deployed to have a systematic bias in a certain direction. Some examples were discussed like that when you think about triage algorithms, those algorithms that decide, for example, in a hospital during, for example, COVID, who should be treated and who should not be. You can think that these algorithms could be actually influenced in exchange for bribes. And this is a risk that is very difficult to detect. And I think that's one of the main takeaways from our report, is that we need more awareness of these risks in order to actually then also look into algorithms to understand if such systematic biases exist. A more comical version of this was illustrated by Iyad in his evil cartoons. Great. Now, finally, you can also just apply the system in a corrupt way. So the data scientist could actually use, for example, the knowledge and the ability to use targeted misinformation campaigns and advertisement campaigns to actually influence people's views and skew them, or maybe particularly use misinformation campaigns that targets people specifically because they know who will be most influenced by it. And that in order to distort democratic political processes. Now, what I've talked about so far is basically many of the cases where you could think that there are malicious actors that are trying to make use of AI as a possible and powerful weapon for their malicious purposes. However, in our other research, we also show that actually it doesn't have to always be a malicious actor who's influenced by AI. And we can call this like AI can also corrupt average citizens, which we sort of illustrate with this little image here. And what we found in many studies that you can read about in this paper, Bad Machines Corrupt Good Morals, or this openly available op-ed in LA Times, is that oftentimes AI can influence or sway our moral compass by facilitating justifications for unethical behavior. And that goes in the direction that maybe people who are well-intended might be using AI, and the AI might be doing or swaying their behavior in a more unethical direction. And I can talk a little bit more about it maybe later in the discussion of how AI in different roles might be influencing not just malicious actors and enable malicious actors, but actually also influence average citizens to maybe disregard ethical rules more. And I think that's a risk that is often overlooked when we talk about AI safety. So where does that leave us, right? So I think there are at least three countermeasures, and I put them together with Chris and Giselle Edward-Gill. We basically proposed three pillars of countermeasures. So the first one is a legislative one, right? So what we believe is that we need to really uphold these principles that many people in the AI field sort of summarize as the big four, which are fairness, accountability, transparency, and explainability. And that needs to be done on many levels. And I particularly believe that in these global challenges, such as the potential corruption risk of AI, we do need answers on a supranational level. So every country in and of itself will probably have a very tough time to address these issues, and we need to refer to the EU, UNESCO, OECD, and others to basically have a strong legislative framework that adheres to these principles. So far, the frameworks that have been proposed by these organizations and others, they don't really look at the corruption risks. And so I think that's something that needs to change in the near future in order that people are aware of these risks, but also think about frameworks how to address them. The second one is a technical pillar. And that technical pillar is actually in order to inspect an algorithm and to understand how it works, we need to actually have data and code transparency. And that means researchers, engineers, coders, etc., need to be able to inspect a model. And one of the problems with many of the models that are out there is that they are proprietary, and many of the companies behind them are very reluctant to basically open the hood of these models in order for people like researchers to understand whether there are such problems at play or whether such, for example, algorithmic capture has taken place. So that's actually something that would facilitate model audits and would strengthen MLOps capacities. And so that's something that we believe is very important to basically enable not just transparency on paper, but really active transparency in the sense that people can inspect these models and check their workings. Now, the last pillar is a human aspect, right? The human side of things. And I think there I've already referred to it. We need two things. We basically need more, and I would say broader, ethics trainings that are making those who are developing these systems aware of these risks. And in a way, it's like an anti-corruption training for those who are building these models. Currently, these developers, who's a very small group of people, are often not very sensitive to the topic of corruption. And the main takeaway that I've already alluded to is really that we need to raise awareness. And that refers to also you, the audience, and the youth especially, that you are aware of such emerging risk and maybe can keep an eye out for these things and maybe be critical about some of these models in the sense that you might be questioning their output. Just because an AI said so doesn't necessarily mean that it is actually the right decision. And these systems can be tinkered with by those who are in charge of them. Now, this brings us to the second part of the talk. And that is basically the part of the talk that is hopefully, at least to some extent, a bit more hopeful about the use of AI. And it looks at the promises of using AI to fight corruption. Now, here we need to also be aware of the perils, right? Like the risks that come with using AI as an anti-corruption tool. Now, for those of you who are in the anti-corruption field, the community that gathers always on the 9th of December for some events for several years, you might have seen many of these headings already, right? So we had Oxford Insights basically saying that artificial intelligence is the next frontier in anti-corruption. We have the Christian Mickelson Institute, which is hosting U4, the Anti-Corruption Research Center, writing a big report that it is a promising tool potentially for fighting corruption in development settings. But also organizations such as the World Bank releasing reports on this particular topic, trying to basically, ride this wave of enthusiasm around AI and bringing it to the field of anti-corruption. And together with Chris Starke and Iyad Ravan, we basically critically examined when and how this hype or this excitement is actually justified. Now, there are good reasons to be hopeful that AI could really be a game changer in the fight against corruption. Let me just briefly summarize a few of them. Some of them I already briefly mentioned too. So, previously I mentioned that AI has these autonomous learning abilities, and I really believe that this is one of the strengths of AI, meaning AI can become a more independent an automated part in anti-corruption tasks. It can by now predict corruption quite well. It could potentially be used to actively detect corruption. And later I can maybe talk about a few of these examples that already exist where these autonomous abilities have been used in quite successfully, or at least in a promising way, to fight corruption or to detect it. And to basically take, I mean, the analogy that I like to use here is like, anti-corruption often involves multiple tasks. Some of them are very labor intense and sometimes very annoying, right? Like, for example, going on an open data portal and sifting through the data to find irregularities. That's a task that humans are typically either not really good at or really don't like to do. And I think we should think about AI as a useful tool to do that on people's behalf. Now, the second thing is that thanks to its computing power, it actually can also help us to keep track of very complex corruption schemes, right? Like many of these corruption schemes, especially the ones that are going across multiple jurisdictions, are often very difficult to detect and to disclose. And if you look at, for example, these massive data leakages, like the Panama Papers, Pandora's Papers, and so on, they were often they required massive efforts from journalists to actually uncover what was going on. Oftentimes, these either tax evasion schemes or corruption schemes are covered quite well, and AI can really be a sort of discloser of these complex patterns, because that's one thing that it can do quite well. Now, the last thing, that's something that, for example, the late Daniel Kahneman was talking about, a Nobel Prize winner in economics, basically saying if an algorithm is implemented responsibly, it can have one huge advantage, and that is that it's consistently impartial, right? If you, for example, program an algorithm that knows exactly which are the requirements to, for example, let's say, receive a passport, and people can just say, okay, I tick this box, I tick this box, I tick this box, the algorithm will hand out or basically issue a passport. You are reducing a risk of bribery in this particular context, right? The algorithm doesn't have any pecuniary self-interest, doesn't know family ties, etc. And it will basically make these decisions exactly the same way every single time. They don't get tired. And that's something that we know from human research, that humans tend to be rather partial, right? We always care about, is that a friend or a foe? Are we tired or less tired? And if you're interested, you can find a bunch of research that shows how our ethical decision making is influenced by such features. The algorithms don't have that, and that's an advantage if it's implemented correctly to basically reduce the risk of corruption. At the same time, some features of AI in the fight against corruption are also problematic. Excuse me. So there are some challenges that we need to fix before we can completely jump on the hype train and use AI against corruption. The first one is data. Quite simply, it's something that those of you who are maybe either working with researchers or have ever tried to actually study corruption in an empirical way, is that it's really difficult to have a ground truth of corruption. Having good data on corruption is very difficult. Often there are biases in these data, and then oftentimes the data that would be most useful to, for example, train an algorithm to predict corruption are not necessarily accessible. The second thing is, how can we fine-tune the model or program an algorithm in a way that it works best? There is a very peculiar challenge here that I think is to some extent unique to corruption, and that is the following. With any algorithm, you always have to determine what's called a confusion matrix of the false negative and false positives. What does it mean? Well, essentially, you need to know, or you need to decide, do you want the algorithm to be sensitive, meaning that every case of corruption is being detected, or should it be a bit less sensitive in that sense that some of the cases of corruption are going undetected? The sensitive model will tend to also have what's called false positives, meaning it might accuse people of corruption that are actually not corrupt. And the other model, that less sensitive model, might lead to some corrupt offenders going free. And that's a calibration problem that you need to figure out if you're using AI to fight corruption. Now, just to give you one example, there's one algorithm in Brazil that automatically flags suspicious activities by Brazilian parliamentarians. So there's a platform where Brazilian parliamentarians need to basically declare the costs that they have incurred for example, going on joint lunches and dinners with their colleagues, right? So there's a transparency mandate around that. So they always need to upload the receipts of how much money they spent on such food items. Typical example for something that humans will have a tough time to sift through and find irregularities. And it was a great case, or a great, I would say, maybe pilot project by Irio Muskov and others called Rosie, that basically used this information automatically and automatically tweeted out to the public, hey, parliamentarian X, Y, and Z, here's a suspicious activity. I mean, you declared much more money than you're allowed to. Could you please clarify? Now, here the trade-off becomes very obvious, right? Like, if this algorithm is oversensitive, it might accuse some parliamentarians that are completely innocent of being corrupt. However, if you're setting the bar too low, then some other corrupt offenders might go free. And that's a trade-off that needs to be carefully calibrated to get it right. Because, as you might imagine, in the case of Rosie, corruption often comes with a very strong stigma to those who are being accused of it. And I can tell you a lot about it also from Germany, where we had one president basically being ousted because of corruption allegations that turned out to be actually mostly inaccurate. Then finally, there is also here a human challenge, right? Like, there is what we call the paradox of control. Now, bear with me for a second. It gets a bit complex, but I do believe that you will probably get the gist of it quite quickly. And that's the following. We believe that AI has the most potential to fight corruption in contexts where there is a lot of corruption. Now, at the same time, we know from research by Rothstein and others that basically shows that if you're trying to introduce anti-corruption to a corrupt context, the risk is that these anti-corruption efforts might fall prey to corruption themselves, right? The example of, for example, anti-corruption agency being corrupted, etc. And so, ideally, if you wanted to use AI instead of a human anti-corruption body or AI-driven task, then you should actually try to implement it so that people cannot tinker with the system and corrupt it for their private interests, right? So you ideally would want to have the human influence on these systems to be minimal so that they cannot corrupt AI systems in these contexts. However, that comes with a huge risk, right? Because one of the things that is often mandated in policy documents is that in high-risk context, there needs to be a human in the loop or a human on the loop that basically checks whether the algorithm does what it's supposed to do. And we have many examples where the algorithms actually misbehaved, and if it wasn't for humans in the loop, it would have done some catastrophic things. And we all even have cases where even the human influence or the human in the loop did not help to avoid the algorithms to do malicious things. So in a way, we need to find a good solution for this paradox of control, which on one hand says we should have people's hands off so they can corrupt it, and on the other hand says we should have humans who are in control of these systems so they avoid them of going awry. Now, let me end with a few examples so I think you get the gist of the main message of the paper. Namely, we believe that the implementation of AI anti-corruption tools, or you could ask, like, who is actually implementing it, has a huge influence on whether we should rather see it as a huge potential or maybe rather as a risk factor. And the two things that we summarize here, or the two implementation methods, are top-down by governments and companies, or bottom-up. Let me first walk you through the top-down implementation that we identified at the time of writing the paper. And I would be curious to hear from you if you know any other examples where governments have been using such systems. There was, for example, a big contract being awarded to Microsoft that collaborated with the Nigerian government to, as they say, accelerate digital transformation in the country on using what they called AI acts, so AI-based anti-corruption tools. And there was also a case in China that used AI-based system called Zero Trust that surveyed the over 40 million public officials in China based on whether there's any suspicious activity in their, for example, in their bank files, etc. Now, what do we see here as a risk? Well, when governments are implementing such AI tools and they're basically introducing such an infrastructure for AI to officially fight corruption, now these systems can easily be abused to actually consolidate the power that these governments and companies already have. And you might, for example, abuse it, for example, for spying on the political opponents. There are some allegations in the Zero Trust program in China that these top-down AI-based anti-corruption efforts have actually been mostly used to intimidate political opposition. So that's a real risk that we should be aware of. Now, on the other hand, we have bottom-up initiatives that fight corruption, be it NGOs, journalists, civil society organizations, and others, where we believe that if those groups are using AI, it can really be an empowerment tool. And just to give you the example, if they have the actual access to data, they can really, I think, use AI to spur collective action and maybe even couple it with other technologies such as blockchain to really leverage the potential of AI. And we studied that in one of our studies. We had qualitative interviews with people who are involved in these AI Act systems bottom up. And they basically told us exactly like I just said, that there are these massive potentials of AI to help from bottom up anti-corruption initiatives. It can save time and cost. It can increase transparency by basically making government actions visible and openly, sharing the data and code. And these tools can empower citizens to participate in anti-corruption efforts. However, there are limitations that oftentimes for these bottom-up initiatives, the data is not available. And so they often lack data to really make these tools powerful. And oftentimes these laws hinder the optimal use of AI. And so it's oftentimes also very difficult to maintain such systems that they remain up to date. Some examples I still want to mention, though, the bottom-up efforts that you might be interested in looking up and maybe replicate in the country that you're working. There's the Prozoro tool that was developed in Ukraine to basically have an AI-based system built on top of the e-procurement system that would engage citizens to inform them about irregularities in procurement. But also the Rosy tweetbot that I already mentioned is one example that can maybe inspire other similar projects. So on that note, I would like to thank my collaborators. You see here Chris Starke, Giselle Edward Gill, Iyad Ravan, Julia Feuern, and Kimon Kieslich. And here are the papers. And if you don't have access to them, you can find them either on ResearchGate or just by sending me an email. Also, if you're generally interested in this work, feel free to get in touch. I'm always interested in exchanging, especially with people from the practical context. So thanks a lot.
There are not many people who are coming at this subject from the perspectives that you do of psychology, corruption, algorithms, and AI. And so I believe these insights are profoundly useful for our for fighting corruption in the Caribbean. Now, our Caribbean countries have very relatively small, intelligent, digitally aware, tech-savvy populations, a significant majority of whom are youth. And so I'd like to start with a question that looks across the spectrum of AI, youth, corruption, and this issue of cheating. And why? Because I believe that AI may be able to be functional across the entire spectrum, and I'd like to hear your views on it. So I'm going to give you a little story, and then I'll refer to two papers as well as your paper on what you mentioned about bad machines corrupt good morals. So this year on August 20th, well, I should say each year across the region, we write a common secondary school examination we call CSEC, high school students. And so this year it was announced that cheating rates increased in CSEC by 50%. It's unprecedented, of course, and it's not typical for our region to have high school students be caught cheating at that level. But it led me back to something that you mentioned in your Bad Machines paper about, and on your slide, around slide 17, about AI being the ways in which bad machines can corrupt good morals. One of the things that they referred to in the cheating announcement was the use of students using their cell phones and Googling, etc. But my question really is about how, corruption, general corruption, can impact youth, and whether there are any lessons for us.
Yeah, thanks a lot for these very thoughtful questions. And I always like to have examples. So I find that really useful then to discuss the issue. So I made notes. So basically, my answer will be three-parted. The first part, I'm going to briefly outline how we do our research, because I think it's relevant for the questions that you outlined here. The research that we often do with our experiments is called behavioral ethics. And behavioral ethics basically means that you are creating a situation, either in the lab or online, that mimics a structure of incentives outside of this controlled setting, right? You try to basically bring something from outside the world into a controlled environment and conduct an experiment. And the experiment typically has the question of, can we find out what causes this behavior? And the way we do it is by conducting one group with a particular, either circumstantial factor, or where we basically change something in the instructions or the description of the task, and the other group doesn't have that. So we call this experimental design, because we have an experimental group and a control group. And with this design, we can actually try to detect when and how people break ethical rules. And by now, this has been done quite a lot, right? So a lot of people have used tasks that give people eventually or essentially the choice: do you want to break an ethical rule for profit, right? And you can think of many of these examples in real life. Do you take public transport without a ticket? Do you cheat on your tax forms? Maybe do you lie to your spouse or partner, right? Like, all of these have the same structure of, I have an advantage by not abiding to an ethical rule. And the way we do that in our experiments is we often use very simple games to mimic this structure. And the game that we often use is called the die rolling game. And you give people a die roll, typical, like the gaming dice. And you ask them to roll the die in private, and they're all by themselves. They know nobody can see the die roll that they actually rolled. And they're completely anonymous, completely no punishment whatsoever. And then we ask them, come out and tell us the number that you rolled. And the twist of this game is that we pay them €1 if they say 1, and we pay them €2 when they say 2, and we pay €3 when they say 3, and so on. And so basically, let's say you are in our experiment, you come to the lab, you roll the die and it shows a 2. Now you face exactly that trade-off between being honest, come out to us and say, I rolled a 2, or to say, you know what, they cannot find out that the number I rolled, so I might as well just say I had a 6. So I get €4 more. It's around $4, maybe a bit more. We've done that with students quite a lot. And so we know a little bit of how students behave in such situation. And the reason why I'm bringing all of this up is, I think to some extent, AI affords the same type of situation, in the sense that people can use, for example, ChatGPT to write an essay, and they can be quite sure, if they're doing it cleverly, that nobody will find out about it. Now, you can see that as, we basically find in our experiments, to the surprise of many economists, that not everybody cheats, right? From a standard classic economics perspective, you would say, well, if there's no way to find out what you rolled, if there's no way of being punished, you would expect everyone to cheat. Why would you not say 6, right? There's nothing that keeps you from lying. Now, the interesting thing is, in our experiment and many other labs around the world, we find that most people only cheat to a small extent, right? So they only cheat a little bit. You have some malicious actors. It's similar to what I talked about earlier. You have, you would say, a small group of people that cheat all the time. When you do this game, for example, repeatedly and so on, you basically see, like, they don't care. They always lie. You have some people that always say the truth. And you have the biggest portion of people that are in the middle, that are somewhat, they ideally they want to lie a little bit, get a bit more money, but the reason why they don't lie to the full extent is because they care about their self-concept. They care about the story that they can tell to themselves, right? And if I go out of this lab and I can still say I'm an honest, integer person, and I make a little bit of extra money, that's the sweet spot that many are aiming for. And I think the same applies to probably many students. I do believe that many students probably have the intention and the self-view of them of being ethical, and being good humans, as most people do. If we do surveys, you see that pretty much everybody thinks of themselves as being a very moral individual. And I think now AI has this new potential for them to basically engage in cheating without the fear of being detected. And I think some people will use it and others will basically abstain from it. And I think that AI, like you alluded to, will probably turn into a little bit of an arms race where those who try to detect cheating might use AI tools, and those who are cheating might use AI tools, and that at one point we might reach a new equilibrium, similar to previous tools, right? Like there was a while where we said you shouldn't use the internet or Wikipedia for your presentations, and it was really difficult to detect it. So these type of things, I think, will usually at one point reach a certain equilibrium at one point. And so that's that. And the second point I wanted to make was alluding to your point of the bad role models or the good role models, as you outlined. That's something that I believe is very powerful. And that is work that we have done in the context of what you mentioned at the very beginning of social norms. So I believe that observing other people's behavior, be it in the media or just in everyday life, can have a strong signal to us. And it usually signals two things. So social norms are usually divided into two parts. One is called the descriptive norm, and the other one is called an injunctive norm. The descriptive norm tells you something about what is common, what do most people do. And the injunctive norm tells you something about what is actually acceptable. And we have conducted some experiments, for example, also in the field, where we try to actually use descriptive norms as a message to reduce corruption. And the way we do that is going against what you said earlier. We don't want to basically tell people, look, corruption is widespread, because that has the risk that people feel like, well, if it's widespread, I might as well do it, right? If everybody does it, I might as well do it as too. What we informed people about, which was actually factually true, is that we said, corruption is on the decline in your region. And that dynamic social norm information changed people's belief. And they actually said, wow, okay, if it's changing, I might as well adjust my behavior and my beliefs too. So I think that's a potential way how we can make use of the research that we are doing for policy context, that actually depends on how you frame a message and whether this message conveys a social norm information. And then the last thing I want to say about corruption being AI being a bad role model, that's the third part. I do believe that AI can play such a role. So AI can actually teach people bad behaviors. And we see that already with language models such as ChatGPT that are spewing out, factually incorrect information, hateful speech. And we see in some experiments that people tend to imitate that, almost to the same extent as they imitate human behavior. I think that's a real risk that we need to be aware of, because I think people are right now relying on these language models quite a lot, because they give us this illusion of, this all-knowing entity that will answer any question for us. And I think one research field that we need more attention to is to find out how people are influenced in their ethical behavior by such input.
I saw that there was a question in the chat about unconscious bias, but what I'd like to do is to invite the other two experts from the World Bank to join us. As we think about this in the context of youth as well, we don't want to have any situation where we feel like we're whatever efforts being made are pointless or not effective without being able to see the balance. And this is where the issue of unconscious bias comes in. So now, whereas in the situation that I mentioned earlier with respect to the students who for whom the regional examination body made the announcement that they were cheating, and I was asking about the response to AI to something like that. We have the situation where unconscious bias can be integrated in AI by humans, or can manifest in other ways. And I'd like each of you to react to that. Welcome, Marcelo, and welcome, Krishna.
Thank you, Toussaint. Thank you for having us today here. So one of the key things we need to see is AI is used in a multiple ways, right? So one is a text-based, another is the image generation and the video generation areas. So when it comes to unconscious bias, so if it is a picture or if it is a video, you can easily tell by looking at it what kind of an attribute that is biased against, whether it's a color, whether it's a certain ethnicity, etc., etc. But if the bias is in a text document, for example, that is generated by AI, and it goes for like 10, 20, 100 pages long, it's very hard to identify the bias in that text. So that is something we need to identify. So one of the key things that you can do is to go back to your data set, make it enriched, and try to identify the areas that you wanted to reconsider and train your models again and again. So you can substantiate your views strongly, so you can reduce the bias that is existing in the system itself, right? So if not, these AI models are built on the internet that is developed over the years by the humans, right? So it carries all the biases we have in our own society into the model outputs. So we have to counter it by training them continuously, improving them continuously, and also training our staff to be aware of looking out for them before sharing it with the larger groups on what is the largest impact it would have when you share with your key stakeholders. So that is where I'll stop and pass it to Marcelo.
Thanks, Krishna, and thank you to Sant and everyone for having us here today. We're very excited to have this discussion. So, a couple of comments. It also speaks to the comment that Niels made on the illusion that AI creates, that it is so good and it is so good at convincing you that if you're not careful, you will think that it's giving you sort of the full truth. I call that the oracle effect. It's easy to think of AI as an oracle. It's like AI knows everything. If AI gives me the answer, then that's correct. So both in that sense of the having to be cautious about interpreting an output from an AI system, in addition to being able to detect bias, it's really critical, and we spend a lot of time doing this in building up the quality control mechanisms, right? Whether you call it human in the loop, whatever verification system that you think it would help in detecting, first verifying that the information is a good output, and second, also looking at potential biases. It's really important to have as part of your build people that are subject matter experts, right? One of the ways to sort of, in addition to looking at the data, the other way that you can check for bias is to have a subject matter expert assess the quality of that AI output, because in the work that we do, a subject matter expert will pretty quickly tell if something that the AI is spitting out is biased in some way, because they have that sort of understanding of the realities on the ground. So in addition to the data, it's really important to always bring in subject matter experts. And when we develop our solutions, we do it cautiously through a very extensive pilot period where the subject matter expert is always in the middle of everything. The interesting thing about AI is that the human becomes more and more central to the good design of AI, which sort of sounds counterintuitive, but to us makes perfect sense, because it is the human that's going to check whether the AI is producing the outputs in an accurate way. The second point on verification of quality outputs is that, and this is a practical example of the way that we sort of think about piloting and deploying systems, is that we always do it through a program that involves a tiered approach to the verification of those outputs. So, for example, we are deploying our first of many AI agents in INT. So we're building out an AI agentic framework. And for every agent that we build, the pilot program involves not only the users, but also the pilot leads that are responsible to ensure that anything done through that AI agent is run through a series of checks, whether it be checks at the working level, then at the supervisory level, managerial level, depends on the use case. We have we take a lot of time to set up those conditions so that the human is looking at the outputs at many points in time. To give you sort of a practical example, one of the things that we use AI for, and I'll discuss this in our presentation soon, is to assess incoming complaints. And that process, it was really interesting when we started the pilot because the outputs were so good that we knew that we could run the risk of people just overlooking one or two things that might make that whole assessment inaccurate. And sure enough, it happened, where we had 99.9% of the output was absolutely accurate, except for one word that in context would change the entire assessment, right? And in our line of business, words really matter. So it's really important to go through a fine comb to make sure we cover all our bases, especially during the pilot phase where you're sort of trying to get your head around what does this mean to have an AI do an assessment for me. And that really triggered a conversation inside of the complaint development unit about how important it is to be very careful, because once you make a decision based on an output that might be inaccurate, you will run through that throughout your investigative cycle, and you might get yourself in trouble down the line. So it's very important to have these control points.
Thank you very much. And I really would like to ask you to prepare to make your presentation, because I would like to, Neil, before he leaves, be able to get to see the agentic system that you're building. I once said recently, Neil, at the presentation that you can't bribe an algorithm, but I've read some of your work and it's caused me to rethink that, right? Because I think you even in your corruption risks for artificial intelligence paper went into this idea. You took it beyond unconscious bias. You went into the idea of algorithmic capture, where there's an actual exploitation of vulnerable AI by a corrupt actor. And my question really to you as well is, or not question, I was thinking that maybe the reverse can be true, which is that how such systems can also be hijacked. These systems designed by corrupt actors can also be hijacked by good actors, white hat actors, and the reverse as well, which is that systems for good can be hijacked for bad. But what that means for us, I think, in the region is that all I hear is that we must be really sensitive in terms of how we build and calibrate this AI. But I also want to give you an opportunity while Marcelo prepares his presentation to respond to the question about unconscious bias, and from your own research, what lessons or insights they might be for us in the region, in particular our youth.
Yeah, the two things I would say is the one I already mentioned, but I would reiterate the importance of code transparency. So what you just said is exactly what I agree with. Like you can hijack a system and turn it in one or the other direction. And in order to find out if these biases exist, you can do what we currently need to do as researchers, is to probe the system and try to systematically see what it does. Like with language models, we send hundreds and thousands of prompts to see how the system responds to different prompts. And sometimes you see that small changes in the text can really have a big influence. There was a Nature paper showing that whether a description of a criminal case was described in standard English, as they call it, or in Afro-American English, would lead the language model to propose different sentences, right? So that was, just an illustration of how the system is biased and it basically reproduces, as was said previously, the existing biases in our society. So I believe we need more access to these models in order to better understand how they work. Currently, we are a bit, tapping in the dark and trying to, understand it, and we are usually also never really informed when updates are being made and so on. So I think that's maybe a policy question. Now, the second thing I would say is we do have some research showing that, algorithms can in turn exacerbate unconscious biases in humans. And the way that we tested it, I can give you one example that was inspired by the use of AI to detect liars on the European border. Frontex, the border agency, has been testing and pilot testing an AI-based lie detection system where refugee seekers would have to tell their stories and the system would say how likely it is that it's true. Very controversial. Now, I believe one thing that was overlooked in the debate is like, how does that influence the person who has to make the final decision? Because the system would not make a final decision. It would just basically give an officer or a truth score and say like, well, it looks like this person might be lying. And we reproduced this context in a controlled experiment where we had an AI system that could detect lies and truth and wanted to see how it influences people's behavior when they have to make that exact judgment. Is it true or is it false what a person is saying? Now, our normal bias in our behavior is what we call the truth default bias, meaning on average, people tend to believe what other people are saying. Right? So generally, we believe what other people are saying. We have this very strong bias to kind of, first we believe that people don't lie to us. And even though we told them that 50% of these messages are true and 50% of them are false, we found that when people did this decision by themselves, around 20% of people only accuse others of lying, right? Even though they knew there were much more lies out there. Now, what happens when you introduce an AI system that would give people a recommendation? We see all of a sudden lie accusation rates go above 80%, right? And so all of a sudden, you actually see that the algorithm seems to free people from this uncomfortable thing of accusing others of lying. They can actually sort of offload to some extent to the algorithm. You can just say like, well, the algorithm said it's a lie, so I might as well go along. And that's where I see a risk, a reinforcement of these sometimes conscious and sometimes more unconscious biases that can be exacerbated through AI.
What I'd like to do in the interest of time is ask Marcelo to go to his presentation.
So I'm here with my colleague Krishna Kesari. We're both going to present to you some of the practical strategies that we've been adopting to scale the use of AI in investigations. And a lot of what you'll see today is work in progress. So this is sort of something that we're building over the next year or two. And we've done a lot of groundwork to get to where we are, but we still have some ways to go to actually scale the use of AI. So I wanted to start with a quick context for those of you who are not familiar with INT. We are the Integrity Vice Presidency of the World Bank. We're sort of the anti-corruption arm of the World Bank, if you will. And we basically have three type of functions that sort of make up our mandate, including our risk management function. So they're basically three: detection, deterrence, and prevention. So detection involves analyzing complaints that come into INT, doing investigations, and also identifying systemic risks of fraud and corruption, both for bank-funded projects, but also we also investigate allegations of fraud and corruption involving World Bank staff and World Bank staff vendors. Deterrence involves the pursuit of sanctions against suppliers and engagement with firms through our Integrity Compliance Office in programs to promote better business practices and to support high integrity standards. And finally, prevention is really about risk management and raising awareness, training, and helping mitigate the risks of fraud and corruption in operations through a series of engagements that we do on a regular basis with them. Now, in the purple section is something I want to highlight because we are a little bit different with regard to what our colleagues in operations do regarding anti-corruption. And this is really occurs in the governance and anti-corruption functions in operations, where they focus on building capable, transparent, and accountable institutions and design and implement anti-corruption programs together, and they work closely with client governments. We do not do that. We're not client-facing, and that's, I think, an important distinction to keep in mind. Rather, we're a line of defense within the World Bank's operational risk framework. So that's just a little bit of context. So in the next slide, I'm going to start by talking to you about sort of giving you a very high-level overview of the approach that we've taken to become AI ready and to start scaling AI solutions since we started our modernization program in 2019. And by 2020, we had already modernized our core systems. And very importantly, we centralized a data function in INT. So before 2020, the data work was done by pretty much anybody that wanted to do data work in INT. That never works very well, especially if you're trying to modernize relatively quickly. You want to sort of centralize your data function. And we created a data team and started thinking about, okay, how do we move towards being AI ready over the next several years? So between then and 2023, we focused a lot on enhancing our technology infrastructure by building out what eventually became our cloud infrastructure, and we run an autonomous cloud system, a hybrid cloud within our vice presidency. And we spent a lot of time developing and piloting many prototypes of all sorts of solutions that were not all of them about AI, but we're really about integrating data in ways that we couldn't do before. Now that we had a cloud infrastructure, we were able to bring in information, integrate it, and join it with our own portfolio data. So we have a lot of information coming in from the institution, and we sort of build that into our own portfolio of information that we get through our own work. So we did a lot of preparatory work. We tested a lot of types of different approaches to solution building using machine learning, AI, and more recently generative AI, with an eye towards being able to start scaling this up in 2024, which is sort of where we are now at the end of 2024, where we have spent pretty much almost the full year really taking a close look at some of the operational frameworks that we needed to have in place in order to scale up the use of AI and other advanced technologies. So over the next 2 years or so, our intent, especially this next calendar year, is to be able to deploy a lot of the AI solutions that we've been building at scale, meaning for all of INT staff to be able to use. And then over the next several other years, 26, 27, it's really going to be about enhancing those solutions and also enhancing our delivery systems, which is also an important part of our strategy. So one word about our cloud ecosystem, and it's important to sort of cover this in a few minutes, just to give you a sense of the areas that we've been working on to ensure AI readiness and being able to deploy at scale over the next few years. So the INT Cloud, it gives us a lot of advantages that allow us to be really agile in the way that we work with data, the way that we test systems and approaches, and the way that we deploy them, because we are able to both develop and deploy within our INT Cloud. So within the cloud, we've been able to dedicate specific types of technologies of data environments to be able to do machine learning and AI. So we have several types of technologies, and we use several types of frameworks to be able to bring that work together and be able to deploy it securely within our cloud. We also are building a series of applications that have, right now, they're the typical applications with, that allow you to see data sort of through a dashboard, but we are going to add AI layers so that you can query those applications using natural language. The INT Cloud also allows us to store tremendous amounts of data in it, and it's very elastic. So depending on your storage needs, it can go up and down, so you can control costs in that way. And it also allows you to set up all sorts of databases for you to query the data, whether it be structured or unstructured data. And it also allows you to do all sorts of analytics, because you can combine many sort of technologies within the cloud in ways that can help you develop specific, very highly customized solutions for your work. So that's the cloud is really sort of central to our data strategy, because it has allowed us to be able to spend quite a lot of time preparing the technology infrastructure to be able to do it, sort of leverage advanced technologies at scale. All right, so now I'm going to move over to some of the frameworks that we're using to work on many aspects of data and how that relates to AI. And one of the core frameworks is what we call the AI driven risk intelligence framework, which is sort of this blue disk that you see on your right. And this is really just an approach to manage an assortment of data attributes that really we're doing this from the angle of risk, because at the end of the day, whether you're investigating, doing integrity risk management or compliance monitoring, you're really doing risk management, right, in different ways. And the intelligence framework is sort of a cycle. So this is what you see in the blue disk, from the generation of the data to the collection, the processing, its analysis, to its dissemination, the customization of content, sort of the repackaging of content, and be able to receive feedback from end users and subject matter experts to sort of continue the process of improving your information gathering processes, analytics, as well as dissemination. And in red, you see the AI agentic framework, which is basically a layer of AI that sort of is wrapped around this whole framework, which is going to really help us accelerate some of the work that we have planned on being able to go deeper and analyze larger sets of data that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise, and be able to sort of give us better and more accelerated insights about what are interesting patterns that we may see, or different types of information that we need to sort of collect, bring together, and analyze to understand where the risks are. So this now, if you are familiar with threat intelligence, this is very similar to a threat intelligence framework, but it is sort of customized for INT. So let me go over just very quickly the two sections of the disk, of the data generation and the data execution, and how AI sort of fits into this. So for data generation, where we begin with the planning and the direction that we want to go with the data that we have, the idea is that as we collect data, we will be using AI to both process it, to help us clean it, to help us analyze it, and to help us set it up so that different audiences can look at that data, and we can provide different types of insights depending on our audience. So if you're an investigator, you will need data to do, let's say, pattern recognition, whereas if you are managing risks at a sectoral level and you're in the preventive team, you might want to look at what are all of the patterns, how can we articulate the risks that we're seeing in particular sectors, right? So it's more of a narrative that we want to build. So depending on the use case, you have different different ways that we're going to apply AI to enable us to extract that content. And the one thing that we are expecting, and we don't know this yet, but we're sort of preparing, is that as we use these systems and we gain additional insights by using AI, we'll be able to identify more areas to collect data from the outside world or even from within the bank to sort of help improve the use, improve the processing through these AI models and other technologies to get better outputs. So this is going to be quite a continuous cycle of data improvement. So when we get to the execution side of the data, now that we've run some tests, the AI is also going to be used to help us sort of format that information in a way that we can detect it. So this is really about customization, and we've tested AI on some of the ways that we would like to format information for the different audiences. So if you have information about what are the trends and the complaints that we see coming in from a certain region of the world, that information is formatted very differently than if we're looking at information on detecting a particular pattern inside of one investigation in one contract, in one project. And the important thing here about the systems that we're going to use that involve AI to sort of strengthen the underlying data that will give us sort of the risk signals is the indicator scoring and the enrichment models that we're building. So for the indicator scoring, the primary aim of that indicator scoring is really to evaluate and rank various data indicators or threat signals based on their importance, relevance, or risk level. And this will help in determining which indicators need immediate attention and which ones can be deprioritized. And for the enrichment models, those are designed to augment the raw data indicators with additional context and intelligence. And this contextualization will enhance the understanding of each indicator and hopefully support more informed decision making. So this is the idea of this framework. We are literally starting to implement it only a few months ago. But really, the idea here is the combination of AI and data processing that hopefully will give us better opportunities to really dig deep into what do all these data, does all this data and all of the signaling that we can get from these approaches help us improve our ability to manage risks. So, and here from this framework, one of the things that has been very helpful is that we can sort of organize our information, organize our work program around all of the AI work streams that the framework presents to us. So if here on the screen is sort of a high-level representation of what those AI work streams are, and we've been working on these all in parallel. So they all have sort of different, levels of difficulties, different challenges, also different opportunities, and different timelines. So on the left, you see that we are working on analytics, risk management, and knowledge by developing, for example, pattern recognition systems and anomaly detection processes using machine learning. We're looking at bid analytics, entity analysis for our suppliers, and building processes to identify trends within our own portfolio. And all sorts of other risk management analysis, both from bank operations and also from within our portfolio. And on the right, you see the tools that we are building, which is basically all of the AI agentic framework, where we're going to build an AI agent, and Krishna will explain this in a bit, for pretty much every core function of INT and run them in an integrated network. But we're also working on building a research tool. So for INT case law using AI, we are well on our way of now almost a year using translation and transcription AI. And we're also going to use AI to help us with reporting, help us with our KPIs, and also with collaborations on AI with other multilateral development banks and other actors. So this is sort of the basic view of where we're going with AI. And I'm going to turn it over to Krishna now, who's going to be talking to you about the AI agentic framework. But before that, I just wanted him to start with this slide, which is it sort of gives you a sense of how we select an AI use case and then sort of develop it from ideation all the way through to production and deployment. So over to you, Krishna. Thanks.
So when we look at AI in terms of how do we build them to how do we actually ensure that they're available to the end users, we follow a certain procedure. So the first step is you have to identify the use cases, like what are the business areas that you want your AI to focus on. And then you need to look at the solution building in terms of how do you build those tools. And the third one is how do you scale? So how do you ensure that these are production grade and they are safe and you can continuously improve? In the first one, which is the use case selection, first you need to work with the business to identify the business need. And then next step is you have to identify which processes in your business can be turned into AI driven and which are non-AI driven. So you have to segregate those so you can prioritize which ones you want to first tackle. Then assess the feasibility. There are two areas you can look at. One is on the technical aspect of it, whether you have a cloud infrastructure to host these tools, whether you have a technology enough to implement those. And the second is the operational side of it, whether your teams are ready to actually use these AI tools, right? And whether you have processes in place that accommodate the AI into the business processes. So you have to look at that area while you are doing the use case selection. Then comes the solution building. Once you understand that, okay, these are the 5 things I want to turn AI-driven processes, then you start developing the prototypes. So this is one way we changed our view about the tools is how fast we need to move, especially when it comes to AI, because AI is a field that is moving so fast. So you cannot take a 1-year process to build a tool. Rather, you need to start looking at first prototyping and start reaching users right away. So you give them the latest possible. So that is where we develop our prototypes and collecting the feedbacks, something Marcelo mentioned about the responsible AI. So one of the key things we want to do is to work with the users to see what are the areas that AI is not doing a good job, what are the areas it's actually doing a good job. And that feedback can be collated to ensure what areas we can improve. So the third part in the solution building is the proof of concept. This is where we organized a structure called AI pilot leads, where we work with the leads while the end users are using the tools. And every month we collect the reports on how they are using the tools, what are the efficiency gains, and what is working, what is not working, etc. So once we understand that this tool is being used really well for the business, then the third section is the scaling. How do you ensure that this is available to large teams? So like the entire INT staff, for example. So to do that, you need to go one level higher. In that scenario, we need to get the security accreditation. So in line with our strictly confidential data. So that is when we work with our IT teams to ensure that we have our cloud infrastructure secure enough to handle this application. And then next is while you deploy these tools to the end user, a larger group, so you continuously monitor the performance. So this is a change from our existing approach to the software is to continuously monitor the performance because AI is constantly evolving. So you add more data, you enhance it, you train, fine tune, etc. So in that process. And then finally, once you reach to a point where you're happy with the tool performance, at the same time you have all the security standards required, then you can go for a production level deployment where it is a full grade software that all the business can use. So this is the overall view of how we get from selecting a business case all the way to ensuring the tool is securely deployed to our business staff. Yeah. And then we have, so underneath all of these tools, we have a powerful AI architecture. So one of the approach we have in that is the multi-agent framework. So this is a big picture of how multi-agent come together in terms of what are the functions they do. So first of all, you need to have like a single agent. In the slide you're looking at is actually one single agent, but that has several capabilities. So some of them you can see is that it can do a document review, it can generate a document, it can do data analysis. So it can do code generation, knowledge engine, and the pattern recognition. So it can do translation in over 100 languages, the same with the transcription. So from audio to a text. So in this scenario, all the blue oval or ellipses there is the function of individual agent. So together, this powerful architecture will become a one simple subunit. So, and in the middle of all these functional parts of an agent is the orchestrator, which actually manages the tasks. So orchestrator gives each agent the capability to handle multiple tasks at the same time. It distributes the task based on your business need. For example, you can choose the task you need, like I just need for this particular task, for this particular function in INT, I need a translation and a document generation. You could only activate those two functions, and the orchestrator would divide the power of the compute between only those two. So that way you have so many combinations of small spawn units that you can do, and the orchestrator is the primary agent, so the primary controls what all the other secondary agents can perform. In this scenario, I mentioned that we are building functional agents. Basically, functional agent is every business function has a different mandate, right? So based on that mandate, the kind of a work they do changes. So based on the work they do, the AI agent also should have a different kind of a characteristic. So that is where we design the orchestrator to have what kind of features that it can perform. So we have identified several agents like complaint agent to help us with the intake process and the investigative agent, and the data analysis agent to help us with the data science part. So that way we have devised multiple agents for each function. But at the end of the day, so you need to have a network structure where these agents has to talk to each other to achieve a final goal. So for an end user, if you want to generate a report that brings the information from different parts of our business unit, so each functional agent of that particular unit would be combined together when an end user asked, can I, any report that you want to generate, it takes the help from different agents in that network and gives you an output. So that way you have not just one AI agent that's giving you the power, but you have an integrated network of AI agents that's actually helping through segregating the information, filtering the information with multiple tasks. So this is a structure we are currently implementing, and we do have several AI agents that we already have deployed. So with that, I would also emphasize on how do you ensure the trust on AI among your teams. That is a very critical part when you're especially talking to non-technical audience, which is most of the user base. So you have to get the buy-in from them. So some of the key areas that you have to ensure the trust on the AI is in this slide. So I'll go from the data privacy side of the first. So on the data privacy, you have to make sure that the data is protected, whether it's stored in a server or whether it's being used for an analysis, like it's in a transit. So both ways you have to ensure that the data is protected and have a very clear data retention policy and also a deletion policy. So the end user's data is private and it is protected. The second one is the transparency. So when you're building an AI model, you have to document which steps you're taking to build it. So if somebody asks you, how did the AI model came to a decision, you need to be able to explain it. So that is all part of the transparency. This actually builds the trust with the end users. Like, can I trust the outputs that are coming from the AI? And the third one is the bias mitigation, where you have to constantly audit the AI system. So what kind of an output I'm getting when I enter a certain prompt? So is it fair enough? So you have to build a fairness metrics and start looking at what kind of prompts are giving what kind of outputs, whether it has any kind of a discrimination in the kind of outputs it's generating. And the other one is the human oversight. So this is where when you're building and deploying the AI, you need to ensure that human is in the loop. So to make sure human is part of reviewing the documents that AI is generated. They are in the part of editing the communication, the emails, etc., that are translated through AI. So or proofreading them. So one thing we were doing is which areas that we can delegate between the humans and the AI throughout the process of our multi-agent framework. And the next is the proportionality. This is something I spoke in the previous. When we are selecting the use cases, we have to ensure that the proportionality is in the place. Just because AI is available, you want it to apply it to everywhere. Rather, you have to focus on which of the processes in the investigation, for example, can be turned into AI, and which of the processes should not be turned into AI, where you need to let the humans do the tasks. So that proportionality is important in a sense that to ensure that the work is distributed between and there is a process and checks in place. And the responsible use. So this is something we constantly work is to train our staff constantly, like what are the giving more and more prompt engineering trainings to write a better prompt. So to use the documents generated by AI and ensuring there is a AI disclaimers in place. So when they're sharing with external parties, what are the things you need to be careful about? and which kind of documents need a secondary review. So these are all the responsible use practices that we already have in place. And then the continuous improvement. This is a constant process. AI models are changing every single day. So there is new features coming in. So how do you ensure that the new changes doesn't change what the processes you have in place? So it is not just replacing the model, because the previous model you might have trained with your own data. So how do you ensure the retraining process is in place if a new version of the model is deployed? So that is a very important feature to think about. And then the human alternatives. This is a wide-ranging topic of discussion in the AI policy area, is so whether to opt in or opt out of AI-driven systems. So what is the consent like? Can somebody use my produced painting for the AI training, or should they ask my permission before using it, instead of me asking to remove that from the training later? And also, for every AI process is defined, we also need to have an alternative non-AI process also in place, which means if you're automating or you're making a certain investigative process AI driven, you need to make sure that there is also a non-AI processes in place. So some parts human can also be part of the oversight. So that ensures that there is a more and more trust in the AI systems. I'll stop there, and thank you.
Now we're gonna ask some. I'm gonna ask some questions throughout the whole segment, including all the way down to the issue that of the ethical framework that Krishna just mentioned. But I'm also going to take some questions from the audience. But where I'd like to start is, what lessons do you believe the model that you're building can have from a structural perspective, utility for us in the Caribbean, where there are situations of disruptions, business disruptions and other things happening as a result of natural disasters, etc., and how AI, or building an AI agentic system, not only to increase efficiency, but also to increase resilience and the ability to operate outside of the way that we, or in addition to the way that we currently do, heavily reliant on non-digital and in some cases older digital systems. I'll pose this to you, Marcelo. What utility there is in terms of us being able to learn from what you're doing to perhaps replicate or just learn from in how we approach integrating AI in our everyday life to combat corruption at all levels.
So I think one area that is really interesting, and we started testing this, but have still a ways to go. But you can see the value here is about the type of information that you can bring into your systems from the ground, right? Whether it be related to natural disasters, whether it be related to the presence of some type of entity that can give you information on the ground and try to bring that in. We've seen, for example, when we're looking at pattern recognition systems and ways to improve the granularity of those systems by just adding additional data attributes that we can collect. For example, we know that civil society organizations that are very active in certain types of civil works, for example, where they can give us signals about what's going on the ground in remote areas, for example, are really and can be brought in through feeds, right? We can use APIs from social media, from several sources, bring that information in and add it to our group of attributes that we can then use to improve our analysis. So I think that, and that again, Toussaint, you and I have discussed many times about the value of having a cloud system, is that one of these values is that you can always be on the lookout for what other information should we be adding or should we be looking to add that would help us with understanding the type of information we can bring in to strengthen our analytic capacity for the specific use case. So in pattern recognition, we looked at, for example, unique beneficial ownership that we can bring in through API services. But we want to add to that the tweets that civil society organizations are providing when they're on the ground looking at what's happening in the civil works, for example, and that strengthens the signaling mechanisms, right? So that's an important thing to I think to consider, whether you're looking at natural disasters, the risk of natural disasters, or you're really looking at risk of fraud and corruption, is that you can bring all this information in a way that you can route it through your systems. Krishna, do you want to add anything here?
Please.
Certainly. So one another area, Marcelo, since you mentioned the data, the other side is the infrastructure also, is you have to look at what kind of things you can build to enable this AI into your ecosystem, right? So one of the areas I touched on, the feasibility analysis, where you have to see what are the areas in my existing processes that I could turn it into AI. And the next step is, how would I do it? So you need a cloud infrastructure to ensure that you are able to pull the data in real time, and you could able to monitor the training of the AI model. And then you can start looking at, how do I build tools to ensure that they reach to the end users? So this kind of operationalizing of the AI is a very critical part. So I think that is, irrespective of which organization you are, I think that acts as a template for like, how do I integrate AI into our processes? Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I think the utility, there's great utility in having, I believe, what you described earlier as a sort of what I describe rather as the utility of the cloud system being interoperable, so that it's able to harness data from different sources, including, in our case, regional data. Given that most of our countries are islands with their own systems, I think it would help. Even if there's a regional agentic system that is able to replicate some of what you're doing, I think there's great utility in us having that interoperability. I'd like to take the next question from the audience before I come to Krishna on the ethics framework and human in the loop. This one also touches on the human in the loop, the idea of when and where and how, but it also asks you some administrative related questions. This question is it's a comment first. The framework seems robust. It's from Geoff Wilson. I like the arrangements for a human-based fallback. Did you apply an agile approach to build the agentic system? And what is the anticipated timeline to completion? Stable state, of course, for development. And what was the key selling point used to get buy-in for the model from executive management? Now, before you answer, there was a question I was going to ask about when Niels was in the chat as well, about what kind of selling points can we, as regional anti-corruption actors as well, take to governments and policymakers, etc. So it's great that this question is bookended with that question. So I believe you can see the question as well. Please take it how you wish, Marcelo and Krishna.
Sure. I'll start. I think we spent a lot of time actually on articulating a value proposition when we started. This was, back in 2019 even, and continue to evolve to improve really the value proposition of working with AI and other advanced technologies. And I think there's two important pieces here, and they're actually quite simple. One is the efficiency gains that you'll get from the system, but the other one, which I think is equally important, is the effectiveness gains that you'll get from the systems. Because, and let me give you an example, because we just finished an exercise where we were asked to articulate the efficiency gains of using translation, using AI for translations and transcriptions. And we said, well, it's not so easy to give you an efficiency gain, because we would never spend the $6 million it would have cost us to do translations if we were doing it by a human, but now we're using it by AI. But we would never throw $6 million at as a translation budget, right? But the effectiveness argument is very strong, because the argument for us for this particular use case was, well, because we can do translations with AI, what's happening is that our investigators are able to translate more more and more content. For example, instead of the 5 pages of the bidding document that they want to look at, they can actually translate all 300 pages, get that within a few minutes, very minimal cost, and therefore have full access to the entire document rather than just a couple of pages that we sort of know over time that these are the pages we want to translate, together with the efficiency gain of having it done in a few seconds rather than spending 5 weeks between identifying the translator, procuring, etc. So the value proposition that frames the whole effort of investing in this technology is really, really important, because it isn't just about doing things faster. It is also about what you get out of using these advanced systems that go beyond what you could do with your current set of resources. And we do that. So there are several approaches that we've been using to continuously make that point. We have, for example, we report to management every month about how the AI adoption is going, how the pilots are going. And we set up the efficiency gains and the effectiveness gains as the things we report on, so that management understands where are you saving money and going faster, perhaps, but also how are you improving, which ultimately is what really matters, right? Is the impact that you have to your expediting your mandate. So to me, both of those propositions are very, very important. And one final point about the value propositions is that efficiency gains will happen over time. And while we're all pressured to show to show all the efficiencies that we're gaining from these investments, with AI, you want to be careful. You cannot go too fast, because if you do, and we had a recent experience where we had an incident where, yes, we moved too fast, and all of a sudden, all these impressions were made about what the output was, and it was completely wrong. And we pulled back very quickly and said, no, wait. Because AI is so powerful and gives you the impression that it is so accurate, you have to go slowly. And we spend, I think, Krishna, half of our time is spent on the human aspects of AI, making sure all this is done responsibly, and half of the time is on the technology. So we spend, a significant amount of time making sure all the systems are there for us to go slowly, take the feedback, understand what users are experiencing. This doesn't mean just reporting out through, asking everybody every month to give us a feedback through paper. It's actually sitting down with people and saying, how are you doing with AI? What's working? What's not? Because a report won't capture the nuances, but it's very important to understand what's happening at the user level, because it gives you a sense of how the culture is doing with regard to coming along with you on the journey or not. And whenever there are issues of trust, whether it be somebody forgot, we had a use case where somebody was using the AI agent for something that we said, this is not going to work if you do it that way. He just forgot, because that happens. It was good to have touched base with that person and said, oh, no, wait, that's not what you want to use it for because of X, Y, and Z. So an engagement with end users on a constant basis is really, really important, because it'll take some time for people to understand how AI is sort of changing the way they're doing the work. Krishna, sorry if you have anything to add there.
Definitely. One quick point is we should, on the agile part of the question, is we should rethink the project management in a way, because when it comes to the AI projects management, you need to ensure that your systems are more flexible and adaptability built into the processes. So one of the key things we ensure is we always look out for what is the next and the best model available, right? So, and that sphere is constantly changing and changing. So how would you build a tool that adapts to the changes? So where you don't need to rebuild the entire tool from the scratch for every single change. Rather, you change one single subunit in the code and it is totally have a new capabilities. That is a kind of a flexibility we are looking at, compared with conventional way of building tools where you have a set of a basic product that you do, minimum viable product, and then you have an enhancement cycle that goes on a multi-year plan. So For AI, that doesn't work. You have to continuously look out for new things, adapt to the new changes. And your code is also supposed to write it in a way that it enhances that part of that and it enables that features. So it made us ourselves rethink quite a lot in our architectures on how we build our tools. So now we have some tools that we have a conventional approach. They're multi-year long projects. But when it comes to AI, we don't do that. We do prototyping, let it out to the end users, and take the feedback. So the prototyping is the key part of our process. On the other hand, conventional tools, you approach them very differently. So that helped us move very fast in this lane and adapt to the changes. Yeah.
That's brilliant. And I think that is some of what we need to hear today, because I think we do have the challenge of having big ideas, but not knowing exactly how to get them implemented effectively. And what you just said, I think is very useful to any AI actor across the Caribbean who may be thinking about and learning from how to apply a similar agentic system. Now, we have more questions than we have time. So I'm going to deprioritize the question I had about the trustworthy framework. Krishna, I'm going to ask you to deal with it in the context of the last few answers that I'm going to ask you to provide. I'm going to bundle the questions, and then I'll ask you both to respond. I'll start with a question from Valerie Kelsick about describing the audit process intended, which I believe ties in with the question from Joanne Waterman-Trotman about frequency in terms of audits and what was done in terms of the evolution of the system. And I think that also goes to the human element. There's another question about who led the process in terms of IT. There's always this internal challenge and tension in relation to how things work. I see there's another question here too about working standards of the people in the loop and their availability and incorruptibility of quality knowledge workers in the region. I can probably take that after in my closing comments, but I wanted to ask Marcelo to end as well. So after you both have answered those questions in the next 3 minutes, Marcelo to end as well with a little note about whether and how you're integrating youth in what you're building in the World Bank in the context of the AI or INT in the context of the AI agentic system. So please go right ahead. We have 3 minutes left.
Sure. So about leading the process, of course, we built our cloud infrastructure with our IT department. Now, and that was a very laborious work because it had never been done before. The institution didn't know quite how to do this, but we worked for quite a while with our IT department, got that done, got it approved through all our internal authorization systems. And it's I think very important to understand that while we work with IT on the model, the technology that we wanted to bring in, we also worked with IT on how we needed the model, the overall operational model to change, because AI is going to change the way that we do the work. So yes. In other words, we want to operate our cloud. We want to make decisions about which tools to bring in. We want to be able to explore them. We want to be able to deploy them ourselves based on what works, and sort of make a distinction between the typical cycles that Krishna was mentioning that takes about a year to get funding, and then from capital budget of our IT, and then build the systems over about 9 months to a year, and then improve them over time. That whole model doesn't work for these particular type of solutions that we're building with AI. On the audit question, we're very happy to know that there's a question about audit, because we are actually getting ready to be audited. And this is a self-imposed audit on ourselves, starting in the new year, because we have set up a framework now where we are ready to have our independent auditors assess the quality of the cloud setup, including the ability of us to do AI responsibly, which is, do we have the systems in place to verify both on the machine side, also on the human side, about how these models are working, the accuracy of their outputs. Really, really important piece of work where I think an audit will really help us to get that right and to improve it. Much easier to do it now that we're in the beginning than to do it many years down the line when all of these institutions will typically, routinely audit cloud systems at the level of the business. But right now, we're going to be the first ones to do that. But we will welcome all of the learning that we'll get out of that process. And then finally, this is both about youth and about a question that I see on the chat on what happens to the current resources, right? The human resources as we move toward AI. And my answer here is a couple of things. One is we've been very careful and very thoughtful as much as we could to say, okay, as AI sort of seeps into our sort of main ways of working, what's going to happen to our resources? Well, we have to reskill, upskill, get people used to it, move the culture along, right? Because we know that if you don't move your culture along, you can have all the good tools you want, but culture will eat those tools for breakfast, as they like to say. So very important to make people understand the value of this and help them along the journey of how AI is going to change the nature of the work, because and we've seen this already happening. And one of the things, in particular regarding to youth, is that, for example, the hirings that I'm now we're currently hiring staff, and we're already in the terms of reference and the statements of work that describe the job, you can already see the beginnings of the requirements to have people that have had exposure to AI tools, that understand a little bit about how to use AI, to be creative thinkers, critical thinkers. These are actually skills that are really important in the world of AI, to be creative about and very critical about outputs that you see, about how do you write so that an AI can give you the best type of outputs. And we have a series of learning programs that we have available in the bank to new hires and current hires to go. All our piloting processes with AI require the AI pilot lead to go to the generative AI conferences at least once or twice a year, so that we understand what's happening on the how is the private sector doing this? How is academia doing what is academia saying about these things? So all of this continuous learning is going to be really, really important as part of the whole process of moving towards AI.
Now it is time to hear from some very important voices, the voices of our young people. Youth contribution is so important and essential in the fight against corruption that the theme for this year's International Anti-Corruption Day is Uniting with Youth Against Corruption, Shaping Tomorrow's Integrity. CDB has continually strived to provide platforms for youth expression and participation. On November 19th, as part of the lead up to this 3Cs Expert Forum, CDB held a 3Cs Virtual Youth Forum under the theme Empowering Tomorrow, Youth Combating Corruption in the Age of AI. This was a regional capacity building and consultation session where young people from across the Caribbean heard perspectives from frontline anti-corruption experts and shared their own perspectives on combating corruption in the age of AI. The young people who attended that session prepared an outcome statement. Ladies and gentlemen, key excerpts of that statement have been captured in a video, and you have the privilege of seeing the premiere of that video this morning.
Hi everyone, I'm Samia and I'm here with my fellow youth delegates to share the outcome statement from the recent forum, Empowering Tomorrow, Youth Combating Corruption in the Age of AI. As young people, we see its incredible potential to help us address challenges like climate justice, economic inequality, and access to education. But with these opportunities come risks.
We're asking policymakers to improve data protection system and help people understand their rights around data privacy. We are calling for the creation of AI policy frameworks that protect youth.
AI can also improve transparency and fight corruption. We are asking for user-friendly platforms that provide open access to information.
Proving how we collect and use data is another priority. We also want to see more professional training in AI-related fields like machine learning, data analysis, and data science.
Corruption and cybercrime affect everyone, but young people often feel the impact the most. That's why we're calling for solutions that consider the needs of youth and gender equality.
We believe education on intellectual property rights and ethical AI use is critical for protecting livelihood and fostering innovation.
Youth voices need to be heard. We are advocating for young people to be appointed to legislative boards to help shape compliance strategies in both the public and private sectors.
Stronger enforcement of laws against corruption and cybercrime is essential. Government needs to implement tougher penalties and work with international agencies to hold offenders accountable.
As we look to the future, it's clear that AI will play a significant role in shaping our lives and our communities. Together, we can embrace AI as a tool for building a more inclusive, resilient, and sustainable Caribbean.
Fantastic. Wasn't that absolutely amazing? I think our young people deserve a round of applause. And so, joining me this morning for our final session, we have some of the most important voices to be heard. And we now have Ms. Darren Newman. She's joining me she's the advisor to the acting president at CDB. She is a highly competent international development expert with over 25 years of policy-related and field experience from working with multilateral, bilateral development agencies and governments, providing global development leadership. We also have with us Ms. Rianka Chance, who is a 19-year-old Vincentian youth advocate. And she told me to make sure I mention her age, so you can understand the youth that we have in our presence, right? She's of Garifuna descent. She is a U.S. youth ambassador, a global youth leader from the Global Partnership for Education, and serves as Secretary of the UN Youth Advisory Group for Barbados and the OECS. We also have Ms. Samia Cumberbatch, who is a Barbadian youth advocate. Samia has been engaged in youth advocacy for around a decade, with an educational background in environmental studies, meteorology, and computer science. Notably, she is a published author in the field of gender and a Gold Award recipient of the Duke of Edinburgh Award. Also want to say as well, Rianka is also a published author. So we're among 2 published authors from our young people this morning. And first of all, I just want to congratulate both of you, Rianka and Samia. We would have actually seen you in the video, Samia. And Rianka, we know you played a background role in the preparation towards the video. I just want to congratulate you and the other young people who would have put together a fantastic outcome statement, which we will share later on in the course of this week. And I have a question for you. Based on your experience, for both of you, participating in the Youth Forum, preparing the outcome statement, and listening today as well to our experts, and they gave a lot of very good insights. What are important takeaways for our young people who want to join the fight against corruption using AI? And Rianka, I'll start with you.
Thank you so much, Sandy. And beauty binafi, everyone, which is good morning in the Garifuna language. At the expert forum this morning, we heard from a variety of speakers about the role artificial intelligence can play in fighting corruption. While each speaker brought valuable insights, Professor Corby's speech really stood out. He highlighted disturbing examples of AI being used for corruption, like the case where a doctor manipulated images for dishonest purposes. But what hit me the hardest was the quote about AI corrupting everyday people, not just the youth. It's really made me think, how wild is that? Technology meant to make life easier could actually mess with how we think and behave. But the truth is, AI isn't inherently evil. It's all about how it is used. Which brings me to the next point of him speaking about the who in the implementation stage of anti-corruption tools. Furthermore, the Youth Forum and preparing the outcome statements give us powerful insights into how young people can lead the fight against corruption using AI. One of the biggest takeaways was the critical need to put youth voices at the forefront. Corruption significantly impacts young people, yet our perspectives are often overlooked. This forum made it clear we're not just participants in this movement. However, we're the ones who should be driving it. With our energy, creativity, and fresh ideas, young people are uniquely positioned to shake up outdated systems and lead change. Education is another key factor. You can't fight corruption if you don't understand it, right? The forum highlighted how important it is for young people to learn the dynamics of corruption and how artificial intelligence can serve as a powerful tool for promoting transparency and accountability. But education isn't just about technical skills. It's also about identifying what young people need to engage fully, whether it's access to mentorship, resources, or collaborative platforms. Empowering youth means meeting them where they are and giving them the tools to take action confidently. Advocacy and awareness were also front and center. Transparency and accountability were recurrent themes because they are essential for building trust. But advocacy isn't just about raising awareness. It's about creating spaces where young people can voice their concerns and genuinely be heard. Many participants at the Youth Forum expressed uncertainty about whether their voices are truly being valued. This highlighted the need for ongoing inclusive dialogue and representation, ensuring that youth feel their contributions matter and lead to real impact. The final thing I have to say is that at the Youth Forum, we underscored, and the forum itself underscored, the importance of providing tangible benefits for youth participation. If you want young people to stay involved, there has to be a meaningful outcome, whether it's skill building opportunities, career advancements, or real policy change. The exciting part, AI makes this work even more dynamic and impactful. Imagine using cutting edge technology to uncover corruption, build transparency, and drive solutions that benefit everyone. Just imagine that. And thank you.
Thank you, Rianka. Imagine that indeed. I like what you said that, youth are actually the drivers in the fight against corruption. And it's ensuring that that youth feel that their contributions are indeed valued. And that's very important. Samia, same question to you. What are your key takeaways from your experience in the forum and from what you've heard from the experts today?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Thandi. And my key takeaways actually are very similar to Rianka's, because I think certain themes really just rang through the entire time, and this is during while attending the forum, in addition to preparing and creating the outcome statement. And definitely the first thing that rang clear for me would have been access. So, and when I say access, I mean equitable access. So I think youth need to have equitable access to resources, to materials. And one of the things that the presentations today would have highlighted for me is that there are materials and resources available that are free for use. And I think highlighting those, like the availability of those for young people, is very important, where persons are then able to seek out those resources themselves, whether it be in the forms of articles, videos, LinkedIn Learning. There are even Coursera courses that are free. Barbadians actually have access to Coursera through a government partnership. So you can actually familiarize yourself with courses through that. And the access will then lead to the proper education. So education about the two main themes, which would be AI in itself, what it is, the safe and responsible use of AI, and both how AI can be used as a tool for bad, but also for good. And then the other key theme would be for youth to be educated on would be corruption. Really, what is corruption in terms of like ethics, morals, and really and truly how to navigate the spaces that we are currently in. I would say that I think youth are very vulnerable and susceptible to corruption via the use of AI in this day and age. So I do think it's really important for everybody to be aware. And I also think that that governments and policymakers should really make it a priority to educate and disseminate the information really surrounding both AI and its use to combat corruption, because that's really what we're trying to achieve. And finally, I do think a level of transparency, like Ranka would have mentioned, is integral actually to anything being successful. Persons need to be held accountable. There needs to be checks and balances regarding the use of anything really. And in this case, it still rings true. And finally, I really do think the everybody should really remember the stay focused on the goal we're trying to achieve, which is an inclusive, resilient, and sustainably developed Caribbean. Because at the end of the day, AI is simply a tool and it's dynamic. There's a world of uses, and it can be used to achieve this end goal that we are trying to attain. And it's definitely important to include youth because youth are the future key decision makers.
And so, Darren, you've heard our young people. What are your perspectives based on what they have shared in terms of what we can do as our next steps going forward in the future? How can we give them voices? And what are your thoughts on what they have shared today?
Okay, thanks so much. And I just want to say I'm so glad to be in the company of these expert ladies. Thanks for sharing your expertise, your thinking, and your passion for what you do every day. Thanks for inspiring us. Okay. Yeah, I'm supposed to be giving the CDB perspective, but also reacting to what you said. Rianka, you spoke about education, and Samia spoke about access, which are two big things I had on my list for reacting to the outcome statement. Let me just say quickly the outcome statement, very coherent. And I was able to weed out, to decompose it into some core themes. So I think you really did a fantastic job. And I think that that kind of encapsulating it into access, inclusion, voice as one, and then also data collection and use of data in decision making and AI empowered decision making eventually, and also responsible AI, ethical issues, and the ethical use of AI, also the enabling environment and capacity building and learning. You spoke about learning. So I'll just say where CDB as a multilateral development bank is concerned, and one of the major parts of our operations is education. And we have a huge footprint in education. And obviously, we have been looking at ways to enhance the infrastructure, the digital divide, to combat the digital divide through infrastructure, taking a holistic ecosystem approach to this. So it's the people, the processes, of course, also, and things like the software, and making sure that there's inclusion, as we go forward and support our governments in these things. Just wanted to say also that education is we push equity and inclusion. So everything you've said here today is inherent in what we do. We make sure that we are guided, anchored by our youth policy and operational strategy, which has some very strong pillars on youth engagement, empowerment in economic growth, economic and social development. We also have one on youth voice and participation. So the things you're saying here today will make sure that we use these major planks of the bank's work and key principles to continue to drive forward and to listen to you even more. Very proud to say we're happy to work with you on youth leadership on the Future Leaders Network and other youth-led organization and movements. But there's always room to improve. Very quickly, I think we only have 2 more minutes. On the side of open data, we know that once you pair open data, government data with AI, you have the power to have massive gains in anti-corruption. And so we see the youth, the things you said today, ladies, and the things that the youth group have in the outcome statement as being very integral in setting that, pushing even further on these areas so that we harness the power and the potential of AI. In that access is also things like access to the information, you need universal participation in the use of information. So when we work with governments on their governance reforms, we want to make sure that we're not working specifically on open data with some of the countries, but we know some other partners who are. But as they're reforming their systems, we will definitely look for ways to keep pushing these key principles of voice, accountability, inclusion, and making sure that the systems are conscious of bringing in that universal participation. On the data side, I'll close off with this. CDB is doing quite a bit on poverty enhancement, data collection, use, planning to feed into planning. AI may seem far removed from data collection, but I think it was Dr. Toussaint Boyce who said earlier that we're not tech savvy, we're not really at that stage, advanced stage of AI, and much of the world isn't anyway. So things like making sure that there is AI governance is not there, but you need to work on the data governance to get to that stage. I see it as a very key foundation. So as we continue to support countries in their data collection systems and data empowered decision making, eventually, we are definitely going to make sure that we continue to engage the youth, stakeholders as very key stakeholders, persons with disabilities, and other groups going forward. There's also the gender equity that we must continue to promote and other forms of equity in all of this. So that's really some very quick reactions. There's a lot more I could say on the open data, but unless Sandy's going to give me more time.
Thank you so much for that, Darren. It's so important to hear how CDB has been working with the youth, with the young people. And we also prepared the youth outcome statement, but we're also in the process of convening an anti-corruption youth working group that young people can take part in, because we want to do what both Rianka and Samia mentioned, give young people platforms to not only contribute, but to contribute in ways that they know that their contributions are indeed valued and their voices are being heard. And in keeping with that, I want to just turn back for just to give you ladies a last word coming in. I'm very interested in hearing, because we have a wide cross-section of people here today. You have a very wide platform here today, and then we don't know who will hear this later on. But what is the most important action that regional institutions and policymakers can take in assisting young people to combat corruption in this age of AI? What comes to mind? I see Samia smiling, so that means she's ready to jump in.
You said what's the most important action, and to be honest, immediately like 5 different things came to mind, not a single thing. But definitely
share them.
No, definitely some of the things you would have mentioned before, transparency in all stages, even as it relates to the data, like Darren would have mentioned. Just having levels of accountability, the checks and balances, and the inclusion, really just being included in every part of the process, not tokenistic inclusion. I actually want to make the differentiation there, not tokenistic, but really when we do have a voice, but it's heard and our voices are meaningful and impactful, where we actually can see change happening based on some of the recommendations, for example, that we give. There's so many things really, but yes, I'll stop at transparency and accountability.
I like that, Samia. I put my note here. No more tokenistic inclusion. I am taking that as a key takeaway. Thank you for that, Samia. Rianka, over to you.
Thank you so much. I find that Samia really summed that up really, really well, because I'm just saying like 4 different things came to my mind at once. But I would say that the most important action regional institutions and policymakers can take to help young people combat corruption in this age is to invest in us and to trust us. And by this, I mean to give us the tools we need to provide education that goes beyond surface level understanding. Teach us how corruption works, where it hides, and how AI can help us uncover it. I would also say to create spaces where our voices matter. Too often decisions are made about young people without young people being in the room. And this is wrong in so many ways. So policymakers need to bring youth to the table, not just as token jesters, but as real partners in shaping shaping solutions. And my final thing will be, like Samuel, to be transparent and show us the results. Support initiatives that prioritize accountability and make it clear how youth efforts lead to real change. And I will stop here, but my last words will be corruption thrives in silence and darkness. So regional institutions and policymakers can empower young people to disrupt that by equipping us with the right tools, including us in the conversations, and backing us with the trust and resources to make real change. When you invest in youth, you invest in a future where corruption does not stand a chance.
We're very grateful that you were able to join us today, and we look forward to your continued contribution. We expect to do similar fora next year on cybercrime and anti-money laundering, again engage with experts, AI and cybercrime, AI and money laundering, and other elements of thought leadership that will benefit the Caribbean region and all the 45 or so other countries that have joined, persons from the 45 or so other countries that have joined us today. We thank you, and may you have a great week, and observe International Anti-Corruption Day in the spirit that it's intended to be observed, with a focus on reflection on how we've gotten today, and a focus on what will take us forward. And that focus has to include technology like artificial intelligence being leveraged for good, being wielded for the better. And we thank you for deploying those insights you've learned today in your respective offices, areas, and functions to help to make the world a better place for this generation and the next. Thank you.